Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Now, today I want to go where many men have explored and never returned. Data. Let's face it, we are surrounded by data. For example, my average day is quite dull. I sit at a laptop, I record podcasts, I write articles, I update social media and make a few telephone calls, take my dog for a walk, go for a run and listen to a few podcasts, or even watch a bit of Netflix. Nothing exciting about that at all, right? But you could look at it another way. My watch checks my heart rate, counts my steps. Spotify, Last.fm monitors what songs I like and will recommend others and other playlists to me in the same way as Amazon and Netflix does a similar service. And every podcast, article or social media post has a wealth of metrics, including engagement levels that could essentially determine any future success. Even the mundane is surrounded by data. Now let's take that into the world of business and using data to truly understand your customers and prospects. As co-founder and CEO of ProfitWell, which was formerly Price Intelligently, Patrick Campbell is using proprietary industry data on over 8,000 businesses to help some of the world's best companies, such as Zapier and Wistia, for example. And they help them to identify the best pricing and growth opportunities that are actually working today. So can we make data sound sexy? I don't know, but I'm going to give it a try. Buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to the US so we can speak with Patrick Campbell from ProfitWell and learn more about how he's encouraging businesses to work hard on using data to understand the profile and psyche of their customers by building quantified buyer personas. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Patrick. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, great question. So I'm Patrick Campbell. I'm the CEO, founder of a company called ProfitWell. Used to be called Price Intelligently, and we basically help subscription businesses with a couple of things. We give free subscription financial metrics, a way that allow people to basically see their monthly recurring revenue and their analytics, and then we make money by selling products to help them with their cancellations as well as with their pricing and a couple of other things. And so, yeah, long story short, that's kind of the professional side, and the personal side, there's not much except for the professional side. So for better and for worse there. But yeah, I'm from Wisconsin, which is in the middle of the U.S. I studied econometrics and math in college, and then kind of worked in tech my whole career in a couple of different capacities.
Fantastic. So upon researching you guys, I quickly learned that ProfitWell is the first business intelligence platform to actually bring together all of the business's reoccurring revenue, such as businesses' financial, usage and attribution data, and bring it all into one place. That's insight laden, absolutely accurate, and 100% free. Now that bit got me thinking a little bit, so we'll delve into that a little bit later. But can you just tell me a little bit more about how you do this, and maybe provide a few use cases just to enable listeners to visualize exactly what it is that you do?
Yeah, totally. So it's basically the long story short is when you think about a business, and it doesn't matter exactly what your business is, but for us, we target subscription businesses, right? And that's SaaS, software as a service, subscription boxes, subscription media, all types of different types of subscriptions. And the beauty of kind of the subscription model is that, it bakes the relationship directly into how you make money. So that particular user, they buy that subscription, and if they, basically, no longer see the value, or you screw up or something like that, then they're going to end that relationship by canceling that subscription. And so with that kind of preface, what's kind of fascinating in the subscription world and in the business world in general is that it used to be there wasn't as much competition. There wasn't as much kind of, problems, in terms of building a business. It was still hard, but it was hard to build the thing or to build the product. Marketing and sales, it was easier because there just wasn't as much noise out there. Again, it was still hard, but it wasn't as hard as it is today. And so because of how hard it is getting and because of this new model, it's really, really important to understand who these customers are, how your business is functioning, where there are holes in your business, where there are problems, and kind of all of the above in terms of those kinds of concepts. And so what we do really specifically is our free product. We plug into your billing system. So it could be, Stripe, Zora, Braintree, whatever you're using to actually build these subscription companies and customers. And what we end up doing is we basically give you insight into here's how much monthly recurring revenue you have. Here how many cancellations are happening. Here's how many people are buying more. Here's how many people are buying less. And just a whole suite of different analytics that then point to, hey, here's a problem. Hey, you have too many people canceling that look like this. Or here's something that's great. You have a ton of people doing this activity, which is awesome. And that allows a business to understand what works and what doesn't. And ultimately helps them, kind of focus on the right things because it's getting harder and harder to grow that company.
And I love how you're solving a very real problem here, but just for the business leader that sat at home now or sat on a train to work, scratching their head thinking, well, he's doing this for free. So how do you do that for free? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, so free. I mean, we didn't start off by wanting to give it away for free. I think the business overall, the longer story about how we came to be is we actually started off with our pricing software, kind of ironically talking about a free product. But we started off with our pricing software, and we basically were helping companies price their subscriptions and things like that. And what ended up happening is, we wanted to get more kind of spread throughout the subscription world, and we also wanted more data so we could make our pricing product and some of the other products that we're thinking about a lot better. And so we built this analytics tool and started kind of distributing it and getting customers and users. We weren't charging anything yet, so I guess it was just users. And then we did a bunch of research on not only talking to those users, but also talking to other folks. And we found analytics products are incredibly hard to monetize, and they're incredibly hard to keep customers around. Because if you think about an analytics product, even if it's for your own personal, well-being or whatever it is, you don't really see the value or the enough value compared to how much work it was to get you that data. Because you might log in once a month, you might log in twice a month. And yes, that once or twice a month was really, really valuable, but you don't see it as something that's worth a lot of money. And so when we looked at the data, we realized, okay, well, this isn't a really good business, to sell something. So it either needs to be killed and let's move on to something else. Or what we can do is, because there's a good network effect with getting the data, meaning that data really, really helps the rest of our products. And in addition to that, because we're in a situation where we can lower our cost of acquisition by giving away something that is of value and that people do find value and they just don't find a ton of value in, that'll allow us to basically kind of bridge this gap with our customers. And we can, as I kind of already explained, bring them in for free, give them a ton of value, then show them, hey, here's this problem. You can solve that yourself. Or by the way, we have this product or this app or this, this resource that you can use to solve that problem. And so it didn't, come together as picture perfectly as I'm describing, but that's kind of, when we look back on it, that's essentially what happened as we kind of went through these cycles.
And just to put it into perspective, what you're doing here, I recently read that more than 25% of all SaaS businesses in the world, which consists of over 8,000 plus companies, they all use ProfitWell. I mean, is that true? Because that would mean you guys have access to more SaaS data than anyone else that I can think of. Yeah.
So we look at subscription companies more than just SaaS. Yeah. So it's a little bit of quibbling, but like SaaS is like, you log into it on the website, right? And you don't really consider media companies, even though you're logging in as SaaS, right? So we have 25% of the subscription world, which depending on who you ask might be, 50 to, 100,000. And so the best estimate is closer to 40, 50,000 that we've found. But they're growing, every day. But yeah, it's true. We have tons and tons of companies using ProfitWell of different, shapes, sizes, all kinds of things, which makes it, really valuable for what we're trying to do.
So I've got to be a little bit cheeky then and ask, is there what kind of Don't worry, I'm not going there. Is there any exclusive growth trends that best SaaS businesses are using right now that you can maybe share with us today?
Yeah, I think the big thing there's a lot of little things that we can go into, but I think that a couple of really big ones that are pretty powerful for most businesses are, one is utilizing what's called a value metric. So when you go purchase a product, like let's say you go to the corner store and you buy a soda, that value metric is one soda. So you give the person a dollar or a pound or a euro or whatever your denomination is, and basically you give them that dollar and then they give you the soda, right? Now with a subscription company or with most products out there, the value isn't as concrete, right? So when I use a marketing product, the true value of what I'm doing with that marketing product is the amount of money that I can attribute to that marketing product, coming in and helping me get more business. And so what you want to do with your pricing in particular is you want to price based on that value that's being provided. So for a marketing product, it would be perfect if you could say, hey, we brought you $100, we brought you 100 British pounds or however structure that you have. But in reality, it's hard to measure that. And so they do it based on number of contacts. So because the number of contacts that you have in that marketing product, it's assumed that you're getting more money, right? You're getting more money as you get more contacts. And so the long and short of it is like using that value metric. If you could find a value metric that works, it's really powerful because then people are only paying for what they're using and where they're getting value. And that therein allows you to have very, very low cancellations, very, very low churn, but also really good expansion revenue because a really, really large company or a really, really large customer is spending a lot of money, but they feel like they're getting the right value. And then a very small customer is not spending as much money, but they're both customers and they're not paying the same thing because you're capturing that value. And so that's one really big one. And I think another one that's a bit more tactical is using price localization. So this is applicable to subscription companies, non-subscription companies, and all kinds of folks. But if you have even 15 to 20% of your customer base outside of your home region, meaning in the United States, if 70 to 80% of your customers are in the US, but 20 to 30% are outside the US, you want to make sure that you're putting those prices for someone who's coming from the UK or someone who's coming from Europe, that it's in their own home currency. And the reason for this is because we as humans, we like to, basically, purchase based off trust and comfort, obviously, and we have a little more comfort in our home currency, but also you can actually adjust the prices in different regions because the willingness to pay in the UK for a product is more than likely very different than the willingness to pay in central United States. And so those are two tactical pieces, and there's plenty of other ones that we can get into, but I think those are ones that are really good for audio, let's just say, without diagramming and showing a bunch of different stuff.
Now, for a lot of people listening, they're going to be struggling to make sense of data and relying on good data and sometimes bad data. In fact, more than often it's bad data. So can you tell me a little bit more about how too many companies are actually leaving an enormous amount of cash on the table by relying on faulty data and gut feelings, and maybe just show how to identify and maybe share how to identify a customer's willingness to pay and what features they value most when thinking about pricing or product or even service?
Yeah, I think the big thing is a lot of us, there's always this debate, right? Where like on one side, someone's like, hey, you need to have like hundreds of thousands of data points to make any decision. And then on the other side, it's like, data is stupid. You got to make gut decisions and trust your instincts, right? And what's really fascinating is that both ends are wrong, at least in my opinion. And I think there's data, ironically or coincidentally, I should say, to support that. But I think it's mainly because like you need to have the right data to support the decision that you're making. So if I'm going to do some ad copy for a search ad, so a text ad that I'm doing, I might have an idea and, I might just put that out there because there's going to be enough traffic and it's a pretty cheap decision, and it's not going to make or break my business. So I'm not going to collect any data. I'm going to trust my instinct. Whereas if I'm going to be making a $10 million decision, and where we focus ProfitWell, if we gave ProfitWell away for free or not, I don't know if it was quite a $10 million decision at that time, but it was a very, very big decision because we didn't have a lot of resources, not a lot of engineering power. So like going forth and giving away a product for free, especially because we're bootstrapped, meaning we haven't had any funding for our business, like that's a big decision. And so we needed some data. Now we didn't get hundreds of thousands of data points, but we got a lot of data. And so I think the big thing is that you have to understand your limits and you need to hedge your decisions. And when you start thinking about some of these decisions as, all right, I want to hedge my decision. How confident am I in this decision? And how big of a deal would it be if I fail? As soon as you start doing that, all of a sudden it becomes easier and easier to understand how much data you need. Now, I will say that I talk to founders and CEOs all the time. I speak at a lot of conferences, and obviously we serve a lot of these folks in terms of our products. I will say that I can make a blanket statement and say that most people, they over-index on their gut and they over-index on instincts, when in reality, it's actually incredibly cheap and easy to collect data. So, for example, you asked about pricing. I think with pricing, everyone's kind of scared to like ask anyone about their willingness to pay, because we're like, oh, it's like, politics, sex, and religion. You don't talk about money. You don't talk about those types of things. In reality, like, especially if you're selling to other businesses, like, we all realize that things cost money. And we've sent millions and millions of surveys at this point around willingness to pay. And we've never had a bad reaction to someone going, oh my God, how dare you ask me about my willingness to pay? Most people are like, yeah, this is interesting. Like, I don't want to pay more, but this is how much I'm, willing to pay. And it's a little, I'm kind of generalizing a bit, but hopefully you get the point. But the way that I would ask for willingness to pay is, I need to understand the best way to ask that type of question. And this is something when you're collecting data, not all questions are good. So if I just straight up ask you, like, how much are you willing to pay for the computer that you're on? That's not a great question, because human beings, we don't think about value as a single point. We think about value as a spectrum. So we know that the cup of water that we might be drinking out of is worth less than that computer. But if I change your circumstance and I put you in the middle of the desert, all of a sudden that water is going to become much, much more valuable because of your circumstance, your environment, and also basically the anchoring factors around you. And so with that in mind, what we can do is, rather than asking, hey, how much are you willing to pay for this? I can ask you, at what point is this way too expensive that you'd never consider purchasing it? And you might have to think a little bit, because it's not a picture perfect, easy question to answer, but it's a lot easier for the human brain to think of a range. And then I might follow that up with, at what point is it getting expensive, but you'd still consider purchasing it? And then at what point is it a really good deal? And at what point is it too cheap that you'd question the quality of it? And all of a sudden, with those 4 answers across, let's say, even 100 people or even 15 people, I can start to look at, oh, interesting, there seems to be some convergence around $50, or there seems to be some convergence around $100. And we actually have some people who are willing to pay $100 and some people are willing to pay $200. No, maybe there's 2 different customers here. We need to do more research. So that's kind of the way that I think through some of these problems. And it's not to say that you're going to get a picture perfect 100% accurate answer. You're more looking to minimize that risk when you're collecting this type of data.
So in your experience, what is the secret in using data to truly understand a business's customers and equally their prospects too?
I don't know if there's like a secret. I think that there's more of just needing to do it, right? And I think that a lot of us, and I don't know if it's arrogance, hubris, laziness, I don't know what it is. I think it's more of just around, like, we just don't do it. And then all of a sudden when we start doing it, we're like, oh my gosh, this is like, this is game changing. It's like, well, I don't know if it's game changing. It's just good business, right? If you ask the luminaries of Silicon Valley, and people have been really successful to boil down all of their advice to one missive, if they could boil everything down to like one piece, what they'll say is, talk to your customers, focus on your customers. And then a lot of us don't do it. But I think the secret is getting inside their heads and not necessarily fully agreeing with everything that they say, but filtering that information and then making a decision based off all the other inputs. Because as I was saying before, like, blindly just following customer research, I also don't think is a good idea. But you have to do that customer research to understand where those customers are. And then based on that information, what you can do is look at what's happening in the market, the resources you have, and everything else, bringing it together and then making that decision. So I guess I would say the secret is understanding that there's no one data point that's going to, to reveal everything. Or I guess there might be, but it's going to be incredibly rare and probably is just not going to happen in your career. But taking all of this data input, filtering it, and then getting and earning your paycheck, which means making a decision and living with that decision as well.
So how do you think data can actually help when businesses are thinking about raising their prices, but doing so without losing customers? I appreciate it's a pretty big loaded question to
Totally.
get right, but it's something that so many fail at, don't they?
Yeah, I think the big thing is like it doesn't matter even if you lower your prices, you are going to lose customers. So that's the first thing is like getting comfortable with like changing your prices will equal some lost customers because again, like you're not trying to get all of the customers, right? A big problem that I have is a lot of people want to be everything to all people. Hey, we want to serve small companies, medium companies, big companies, enterprises. We want to make everyone happy, right? And it's not about this binary like everyone's in or everyone's out. It's more about how do we get the best people or how do we do what's best for our business? And so I think when it comes to pricing, a lot of the times what ends up happening is one, realizing any changes in pricing is just going to remind people that they're paying and then they're going to rethink, oh, maybe I should, not pay anymore because of X, Y, or Z. But then what you can do is you can essentially, use that data to hedge that risk as much as possible. So if I collect pricing data, and it's not just the willingness to pay, it's also what features people care about, demographic information, all this type of stuff, I might find out, wow, like this particular customer who I think is my customer, let's say it's small businesses, they're really, really expensive for me to acquire. They aren't paying me that much money. And basically there's no profit and there's not even the hope of profit down the road. That group, I should just stop selling to them. Now that means I'm going to lose them as customers probably because I'm going to have to increase my price or change my price to accommodate the better customer or the customer that's going to bring me that profit or that better revenue. And it's okay. It's okay to change your business that way. Hopefully you never get into that situation because you've done your homework early on enough. But I've been inside companies that are doing $150 million in revenue a year, and they have to make a major shift because a lot of that revenue isn't great revenue because it's so expensive from a cost perspective. So I think the long and story short to the answer to your question is you don't want to average out your experience. You don't want to average out your pricing by basically trying to serve everyone to all people. And you want to collect that data to essentially make sure you're making the best decisions for your company in a holistic way, not just in someone's willing to pay $5, therefore that must be the people that we target.
So as someone at the heart of technology and data, I've got to ask, what advances in technology particularly excite you at the moment, and how do you think they will help ProfitWell in the future?
It's funny. I have a really boring answer to this question. I am excited about the advances in billing technology. I know that sounds ridiculous, but hear me out for a second. So the reason this is exciting is not because like, oh, you can bill people better and stuff like that. It's actually exciting because if you think about like how we purchase goods 200, 300 years ago, right? It was very much like, there was still bartering happening. And then there was like, currency, right? So like, I'm going to give you this coin that symbolizes this much money. You're going to give me this product, right? End of transaction. As I was talking about before, now we have these relationships, right? Where it's like, yes, we're having these little checkpoints every month or once a year, however long the term is. But basically what we end up doing is we have that relationship. And that the value metric that we talked about, which is like measuring the value that you're providing those folks, that's such a big thing at this point that billing systems need to advance to be able to measure that value. So when you were selling a subscription, maybe, 10, probably like 20 years ago, you might have just done user-based pricing because that was the only thing you could really measure, how many people were logging in. And then you had people sharing logins, and that's not really where the value was for your product. And so it's kind of complicated. And now today you can have situations where, cool, well, instead of measuring per user, we can measure the number of contacts, or we can actually measure the amount of money that we brought you from our product. And so it's really exciting to me to see how we can actually measure that true value. Can we get to the point where we're sitting there and we're saying, okay, this conversation that we're having right now, this was X amount of value, and therefore this is how much you should pay for whatever. We're not going to charge, well, there's probably products that'll charge for conversations. We're not going to charge each other for this conversation, but I think it's one of those things where when you can measure that, then you can charge based on that, and then everyone's happy because this goes back to maybe what you learned in your econ class, which is like equilibrium, right? Where no one has a surplus. No one feels like, they got swindled. Everyone feels like they won, and that's a really, really cool thing for a business to have.
So you mentioned a few moments ago that you have bootstrapped your way to success. So is there any advice that you'd pass on if there's any startup founders out there listening anywhere in the world based on everything that you've learned over the years?
So is there anything that I've learned over the years or just
Yeah.
based on this? There's a lot of things that I have learned over the years. I think that, you know what? I've learned two big things, I think. I think one, I've learned that things aren't binary. I think, well, there's a couple of things that are binary, but there's very few things that are binary. And what I mean by that is I'm sure you've had business conversations or just conversations, down at the pub or whatever, where everyone is just like, well, it's absolutely this or it's absolutely that or everything or never. And it's very rare that things are, absolutely right or absolutely wrong. And unfortunately, the days when there are absolute rights and absolute wrongs, those are, unfortunately days that typically involve body counts, right? Like those are big moral days, right? And in business, like it's more of like, hey, not everyone's wrong, not everyone's right. There's probably like some interpretation or understanding that we need to get to really realize why, someone views this way or why a customer's frustrated or why XYZ is happening. And kind of like relinquishing myself from that binary view, I think is one, just made me like happier. But I think two, it's made me more effective. And the other thing that I think kind of dovetails into that is because bootstrapping, and this is probably not because of bootstrapping, this is all just because of, growing a business. But the other thing that's been really helpful is learning this concept called the most charitable interpretation principle, which is basically when something happens or when someone says something, doing your best, and I fail almost every single day, but I think I'm winning more than I'm failing, if you will, is taking the most charitable interpretation of what someone says or what someone, is really, really doing. So if someone says something that's like, we're gonna ship that, I can interpret that as, oh, we're going to ship that, like, oh, that's a question. I can interpret that as, oh, someone's being passive aggressive. I can interpret that in a lot of different ways. And interpreting it as, the most charitable interpretation. So then I can have a conversation to figure out if they're being passive aggressive or if they're, just asking the question. That's really, really helpful. And it's a good maturing factor because then you have less conversations about, like communication management and things like that. And you have more conversations about, hey, what are we doing to move forward? What are we doing to make this better? Or, hey, maybe this person just isn't a good fit. I think the one maybe more bootstrappy learning that I've picked up is really around just like leverage. I think we haven't had the advantage of, hey, we got $10 million in the bank. Let's just spend money like it doesn't mean anything. We've been, very, very focused on making sure that, we can essentially, win with a good amount of a good amount of leverage, which has its downsides, but it's been good for the business.
Fantastic advice. I completely agree with something you said right at the beginning there about everyone having an opinion, because as someone that's followed the crypto and blockchain space for the last couple of years, it's quite clear there are no experts out there, are there? There are just opinions.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of opinions. I think it's one of those things where it's super, super tough to like figure out those opinions and which ones are great and which ones aren't. And if you go in with I'm always right or this person's always wrong, it just turns into a shit show. Pardon my language. Just because what ends up happening is people it becomes more about ego and more about feelings and things like that rather than like truth. And I think what we're trying to do in a business is we're trying to get to truth, either the truth of how we should grow or the truth of, what's best for the business or the truth of, what's not great for the business. And if you focus more on truth and less about the opinion and management of that opinion, it's just a lot better for everyone.
Well, a huge thanks for coming on the show to talk with me today. But before I do let you go, could I just ask that you remind everyone listening of where they can find you guys online and also maybe even contact a member of your team if they've got any additional questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn at Patrick C. Campbell. You can also email me at pc@profitwell.com. I'm always willing to help folks out. Sometimes it takes a little bit for me to get back to you, but I'm always a big fan of kind of helping, those who are ahead of me and behind me in terms of, trajectory of their business. But yeah, thanks for having me. This was a good time, good chat. I got some things out, which I think is always good. So good, nice little podcast therapy session, I suppose.
Well, I'll bring you back in 6 months and we can cleanse you a little bit more.
I like it. I like it.
A big thank you again for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Awesome, man.
Not only did I really enjoy that interview and learning about the importance of data, and also the great startup advice and the inspirational way in which Patrick has bootstrapped ProfitWell and mastered the art of the pivot. But we also cleansed him of any startup sins or bad habits and enabled him to give something back to the startup community. Maybe I should start wearing a dog collar or open up a therapeutic startup confessional box or round circle where everyone can just share their stories and experiences. What am I talking about? I don't know. I'm a sucker for going off at a tangent, and you really, really don't want to know what just buzzes round my head. And sometimes I just let it out. Maybe I need my own confession. So let's share what's going on inside your head instead. I think that's going to be a much safer thing to do. So email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. Twitter and Instagram are both at Neil C. Hughes, nice and easy to remember. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So keep those messages, insights, experiences, and anything else coming my way, because you crazy guys and dolls are a big part of this show, and long may it continue. So if you've enjoyed our little chat today, come and join me again tomorrow where we will do it all again but with another guest. But all that's left for me to say, of course, is a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.